What if I told you that while Blake Lively floods the internet with glossy nostalgia posts and sentimental throwbacks, a judge is dismantling her entire legal case piece by piece, leaving her with nothing but speculation and shadows? Tonight we pull back the curtain on the meltdown, the moves, the rulings, and the silence that Hollywood can no longer ignore. Blake Lively suddenly takes the spotlight again by marking the 18th anniversary of Gossip Girl with a dramatic Instagram drop. Filled with never-before-seen photos, and the press explodes with coverage, turning the headlines into a wave of glowing nostalgia pieces about her career. But if you have been paying attention, you already know that whenever Blake is putting out this kind of celebratory moment, something else is happening behind the scenes, because every time she appears in the media with carefully crafted positive attention, it usually means that in the courtroom she just got a very big no. And this is where the story starts to twist into something far more fascinating than a collection of old snapshots from a teenage drama series. Because while the world gushes over sparkly heart emojis and New York City memories, the reality is that the judge, in her legal battle, has just handed her a significant setback, one that she very much does not want you to notice. So she throws this bright, shiny distraction into the world, hoping you will forget about what really matters. But let us not be fooled. Because the timing is not random, it is precise. It is planned, and it reveals more about what is happening in her world than any caption about Silvercup Studios ever could. Now, the photos themselves are exactly what the press loves. They are the kind of sweet throwback content that gets shared endlessly. A young Blake on set with co-stars looking carefree in the city that defined the series. She frames the post with language that feels poetic and sentimental, saying the show was her college. Her education, her late nights, her early mornings, her campus sparkling with Paris and Manhattan glamour. She crafts the message to pull you into nostalgia, to make you feel warmth, to make you forget the tensions around her name. But the question becomes, why now? Why this moment? Why unleash all of these pictures after nearly 2 decades, when the cast themselves have kept such distance from her? When the history of the show behind the camera was filled with tension, drama, and broken friendships? Because make no mistake, the record shows that Blake Lively did not walk away from Gossip Girl with lifelong bonds and endless goodwill. The opposite is true. A quick search will show you that nearly all of her co-stars long ago distanced themselves. Leighton Meester does not follow her, Penn Badgley. Her ex does not follow her. The list goes on. The only name who still has a faint tie is Chase Crawford, and that alone should tell you something. Yet here she is reshaping the narrative, creating a scrapbook illusion that she and her castmates were bonded forever, when the reality, according to those who lived it, was quite different. Stories from insiders, runners, and crew members paint a picture that was far from harmonious. And yet in this carefully timed post, she tries to pull Michelle Trachtenberg back into the frame, a co-star who was never known to be close with her. Why include that? Unless it serves a bigger purpose, the strategy becomes clear when you connect it with the recent ruling from Judge Lyman, because behind the glittery distraction, Blake had been pushing hard in court to expand her claims of being the victim of a smear campaign. She argued that Justin Baldoni and his team had manipulated narratives during her film release, during production, and even afterwards. She attempted to move the goalposts again and again, suggesting that this smear was endless, infinite, covering every phase of her career troubles. And she demanded discovery from a company called Sourced Intelligence, a firm Wayfarer hired after litigation began to dig into online narratives. Blake insisted that the company was involved in shadow campaigns against her and demanded access to their internal communications. But this is where the judge drew the line. He ruled that she had not demonstrated any factual basis for such a claim. He wrote clearly that mere speculation cannot support discovery, and that her requests were essentially fishing expeditions into the private legal strategy of the defense. The ruling was not vague. It was decisive. He said she had no grounds to peek into that work product, no right to rifle through the confidential investigations of her opponent. In essence, he told her no. And this is not just a minor procedural decision. It is a foundational blow, because if her case relies on painting herself as the victim of an orchestrated takedown, then losing the ability to prove that with outside evidence leaves her standing on speculation alone. And speculation is not enough in a court of law. So when you connect the dots, the timing of the Gossip Girl celebration looks less like random nostalgia and more like calculated distraction. Because the moment this ruling hit, she suddenly unleashed a flood of sentimental photos, knowing the media would eat it up, knowing that the narrative would shift from courtroom defeat to beloved star. looking back on a cultural milestone. It is the oldest play in the PR book, Create Light, so people ignore the shadow. But when you step back and see both sides together, the picture is shocking because it suggests she is fighting a war on two fronts: the legal war in court, where her attempts are being stopped cold, and the public war in the media, where she still has weapons to shift attention. This is why it matters to break down the reality of what the judge said. Because if you only consume the headlines, you will believe Blake is sailing through life with glowing anniversaries and endless support. When in reality, the legal terrain beneath her feet is crumbling, the judge said directly that she offered no facts to support her suspicion that sourced intelligence was involved in wrongdoing. He emphasized that her argument rested on maybe and possibly, and speculation, and the law does not bend to speculation. He pointed out that she has tried to stretch the timeline of her supposed smear campaign again and again. First during the summer press, then during production, then during the lawsuits, themselves trying to make the narrative endless. But he cut her off saying enough, no more fishing, no more expanding. You cannot turn speculation into evidence, and you cannot demand access to the defense team's private strategies simply because you feel suspicious. That is the turning point, and it is one she does not want you to notice. So while fans scroll through throwback selfies and glossy black and white snapshots, the real story is unfolding in legal documents and rulings that paint a very different picture of where she stands, and this is only the beginning. Because the deeper we go, the more the contrast grows between the glossy public image and the stark courtroom reality. The deeper you look into the way this moment is unfolding, the more obvious it becomes that Blake Lively is not simply celebrating a milestone. She is orchestrating a counter-narrative against the fact that her legal strategies are unraveling, because when a judge as experienced as Judge Lyman writes in black and white that her claims are speculative, that is not a small slap on the wrist, that is a heavy blow, and it reverberates through every other part of her case, because the foundation of her claims rests on the idea that there was a deliberate effort to destroy her reputation, and if that foundation is dismissed as nothing more than suspicion, then what remains of the case at all? You start to see why a flood of nostalgic content would be pushed out to the press at the exact moment that ruling came down. Because the courtroom and the media work in opposite ways. The courtroom demands evidence, the media demands emotion, and if she cannot win with evidence, then she must win with emotion, at least in the eyes of the public. But here is where the suspense deepens, because behind all of this noise is another move that could shift the balance entirely. Justin Baldoni has just brought in two new lawyers, Alexander Shapiro and Jonathan Bach, names that carry significant weight and experience, and their arrival is not casual. It signals preparation for something bigger, perhaps appeals, perhaps a more aggressive defense strategy, perhaps moves to reshape the timeline of these interconnected cases. Because remember, there are multiple lawsuits orbiting around each other. Jones versus AL New York Times, and the Wayfarer disputes all layered together like dominoes, and every decision in one has the potential to tip the balance in another. So when sharp legal minds like Shapiro and Bach enter the frame, the question becomes why? Now, what role are they preparing to play? Are they here to fight back against the endless delay tactics? Are they here to position Justin for an appeal that could turn the tables entirely? Or are they preparing for a larger confrontation that has not yet been revealed? The curiosity is real, and the analysts who follow this case closely have raised their eyebrows at this development, because they recognize that high-powered lawyers do not just appear for small tasks. They are brought in when the stakes are high and the moves ahead are complex. And this brings us to another layer of suspense, because if Blake thought that a smear campaign narrative would be enough to drag this fight endlessly forward, she may find herself facing opponents who are now not only refusing to bend, but actively preparing to turn the case back on her. Because what happens when a judge writes that speculation cannot support discovery? It creates a paper trail that can be cited again and again as the case moves forward. It locks in the idea that her central argument lacks foundation, and that can be devastating when appeals are filed or when related cases are considered. And it is not just the legal terrain that shifts here, it is also the cultural terrain, because every time she pushes a PR distraction, the cracks in her relationships become more obvious. The Gossip Girl post was meant to project warmth, unity, and nostalgia, but the silence from her co-stars speaks louder than the captions. The absence of Leighton Meester, the absence of Penn Badgley, the absence of real camaraderie highlights the contrast between the illusion and the reality, and fans who dig even slightly deeper will notice it. The public has long memories and the internet has receipts. And those receipts show that Blake has often been at odds with those around her. So when she tries to rewrite history with sentimental photo dumps, it creates more questions than answers. Questions that circle back to the bigger issue of why she is so determined to control the narrative right now. And the answer may be that she senses how fragile her legal position has become. Because judges do not use words like speculation lightly. They use them when a claim is built on sand. And in that moment, the entire structure begins to wobble. Yet instead of addressing it directly, she redirects with glossy nostalgia. And that tells you something critical. It tells you that she is aware of how bad the courtroom optics are, and she knows the only way to counter is by flooding the media with positivity. This is where the battle becomes psychological. Because while the legal documents show loss, the public coverage shows triumph, and whichever side dominates the conversation may influence how the next steps unfold. It is a chess game, and both players are moving pieces. Justin brings in heavyweight lawyers. Blake unleashes sentimental distractions. The judge writes that speculation is not evidence. Blake posts about education and hard work and friendship that never really existed. It is a constant push and pull for attention, for narrative, for control, and the question we must ask is, who will the public believe when the dust settles? Will they remember the glowing headlines about Gossip Girl anniversaries? Or will they remember that a judge ruled her claims speculative? Will they recall the warmth of throwback photos or the cold precision of a court saying no more fishing expeditions? This uncertainty is where the suspense lies, because both realities exist side by side and only one can survive in the long run. And while she may hope the public forgets the legal defeats, the paper trail remains permanent. And permanent records have a way of surfacing again when you least expect it. Especially when appeals begin. Especially when new lawyers take the stage. Especially when scrutiny intensifies. So what happens if Shapiro and Bach find a way to leverage this ruling to show that her claims collapse under their own weight? What happens if they use her distractions as evidence of her attempts to manipulate perception? What happens if the court of law and the court of public opinion finally collide, leaving no room for sentiment, only truth? These are the questions looming in the shadows, while the press gushes over sparkling emojis and old photos. And that is why this story is not as simple as a celebrity celebrating an anniversary. It is the story of a star balancing on the edge of perception, fighting desperately to keep control, while the ground beneath her gives way. And every move she makes reveals more about how fragile that balance truly is. As this unfolds further, the sense of unease only grows because we are now watching two completely different realities being spun side by side. One where Blake Lively is the adored star reminiscing about Gossip Girl, a show that defined an era, and one where Blake Lively is standing in a courtroom being told by a federal judge that her arguments are based on speculation and cannot hold up in the face of legal scrutiny. And the tension between these two realities is what keeps so many people glued to this case, because on the surface she shines, but underneath the structure looks ready to crack. And if you think about the way public relations works, you realize quickly that these distractions do not happen in a vacuum. They are timed, they are planned, they are released strategically to make sure that the coverage tilts in her favor whenever she needs it most, and that timing is everything. Because the moment a loss comes down the next day, the headlines are full of nostalgic warmth and glittering memories. And for casual fans who are not paying close attention, the distraction works. They do not see the ruling, they only see the photos, they only see the celebrations. But for those following closely, for those piecing together, the timeline, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Because when you map out the court rulings against the PR pushes, the alignment is almost perfect. Every no from the judge is followed by a flood of yes in the press. And that is not coincidence, that is calculation. And it reveals more about the pressure she must be under than anything she has ever said directly. Because if you are truly confident in your case, you do not need to create these smokescreens. You do not need to flood the media with distractions. You simply let the truth speak. But here we are, and the truth is that Judge Lyman was not vague. He was not soft. He was not leaving the door open. He wrote with clear precision that mere speculation cannot support discovery. And that line alone is devastating because it encapsulates the weakness at the heart of her claim. And this is why commentators, legal analysts, and even insiders from her past projects are now raising serious questions about what is really happening behind closed doors, because the illusion of nostalgia cannot erase the documented tension from her years on. Gossip Girl insiders have said repeatedly that she was not beloved on that set. Stories have emerged from runners and crew that paint her as difficult, distant, and at odds with many co-stars, and the fact that after all these years, the only cast member who still follows her is Chase Crawford tells you more than any Instagram caption ever could. It speaks volumes about how fractured those relationships really were. And yet here she is trying to paint a picture of warmth and unity, including even Michelle Trachtenberg, who by most accounts was not close to her at all. And that choice feels deliberate because it creates the illusion of reconciliation, the illusion that all is well, that all is forgiven. But the silence from the others speaks louder, because if Leighton Meester had truly felt that warmth, would she not have reshared? Would she not have acknowledged the anniversary? Instead, nothing. Silence, absence, distance, and the silence itself becomes a character in this unfolding drama. Because while Blake posts the glossy past, her present reality is being shaped by rulings she cannot control, and lawyers she cannot silence. Justin Baldoni's team has now grown stronger, not weaker, and the introduction of Alexander Shapiro and Jonathan Bach is not simply about manpower. It is about expertise, strategy, and the long game. And that long game may be about far more than just defending it. May be about going on the offensive. It may be about appeals. It may be about turning the spotlight back on her, because remember, the judge has already locked in language that weakens her entire argument, and that can be used again and again as this case continues forward. So the suspense is not just about what has happened, but about what will happen next. Will these new lawyers use that ruling to dismantle her claims further? Will they use it to show that she has attempted to spin narratives? Without evidence, will they reveal even more about how speculation cannot become fact, no matter how many headlines are generated? And this is why the tension keeps growing. Because it is not only about the past of Gossip Girl, it is about the present, of a legal war that may soon reach new heights, and every move she makes publicly may become evidence in how she is trying to manipulate perception. Because in the courtroom, perception is irrelevant. Only evidence counts, and she is running out of it quickly, so what remains is spectacle and distraction. And while spectacle works for headlines, it does not work for judges. And that is why this battle feels increasingly lopsided. But she cannot stop pushing, because to stop would be to let the losses define her, and that is something she cannot allow. So she doubles down each loss, followed by more glitter, more warmth, more nostalgia, more illusions of closeness. And yet every layer she adds feels thinner than the last, and the audience that is paying attention sees through it. They see the cracks, they see the desperation, they see the distance between her captions and the reality that surrounds her. And that reality is stark. She is not winning. She is not convincing the judge. She is not shifting the legal terrain. She is only prolonging the inevitable, and the longer it goes, the clearer it becomes that she is balancing on the edge, hoping the next distraction will be enough to buy her more time. But time is not endless, and speculation is not evidence, and judges do not bend to sentiment, they bend to law, and the law has already spoken. As the story pushes into its latest chapter, the pattern is undeniable, and the suspense only grows, because Blake Lively continues to position herself as the star of her own narrative, using carefully timed throwbacks and sentimental captions to paint a picture of control. While in reality, the legal system has begun to shut doors around her, and the weight of that contradiction is immense. On one side, we see glossy images, sparkling hearts, and poetic lines about Gossip Girl as her university, her classroom, her campus filled with memories. On the other side, we see Judge Lyman writing in clear terms that her claims are built on speculation and cannot justify discovery. And when you put those realities together, you see not a woman celebrating nostalgia, but a woman fighting desperately to distract from the erosion of her legal case. And this is why the timing is everything, because the public consumes headlines without context, and headlines about nostalgia feel warm and safe, while court rulings feel distant and complex. So if she can flood the news with the former, the latter fades from view, at least for those not looking closely. But for anyone following the case in detail, the contrast is blinding, because you cannot ignore the fact that she keeps moving the goalposts first. The smear campaign supposedly happened during the release of the film, then during production, then during lawsuits, then in perpetuity, an endless smear, an infinite campaign. And each time the judge has to pull her back, reminding her that speculation is not evidence and the timeline cannot be stretched into infinity. And now, with the addition of new lawyers on the other side, there is a growing sense that her opponent is not simply holding the line, but preparing for bigger moves. And that raises even more questions. What are these lawyers preparing? What strategies will they unleash? Are they focused on appeals? Are they connecting the threads between the Jones case and the New York Times case? Are they building a structure that shows her arguments collapse under scrutiny? And if so, how long before that structure is revealed? Because if Judge Lyman has already said that speculation is not evidence, then how many more times can she push the same claim before the entire case begins to crumble? These are the questions that swirl in the background while she posts about memories and education and late nights in New York City. And fans scroll through photos unaware that the ground beneath her legal strategy is cracking. And the suspense here is not just about what has happened, but about what is coming. Because with each ruling against her, the options shrink, and with each lawyer added to her opponent's team, the defense grows sharper and stronger, and it is not hard to imagine that at some point soon, these parallel realities will collide, the glossy illusion and the cold legal truth will smash into each other, and in that collision, there will be no room left for distractions, no room left for speculation, no room left for nostalgia. Only the outcome of the case itself. And that is why this moment feels so charged, because we are watching someone try to control perception while losing control of reality, and the harder she tries, the more obvious the cracks become to those who are watching closely. The silence from her Gossip Girl co-stars, the repeated no's from the judge, the addition of powerhouse lawyers on the other side. These are not small details. They are signs, they are signals, they are warnings. And together they create a sense of inevitability. Because you can only distract for so long before reality catches up. You can only flood the press for so long before the court record takes center stage. And when that moment comes, no Instagram caption, no throwback photo, no nostalgic memory will change the fact that speculation cannot support discovery. And without discovery, her case stands on nothing but suspicion. And suspicion is not enough. Not in a courtroom, not under the scrutiny of judges, not against lawyers who are preparing their next moves with precision and patience. So the suspense grows because we know the collision is coming. And when it does, the question is simple. Will the public finally connect the dots? Or will they still be lost in the glow of old photos and sentimental captions? And that answer will decide not only the outcome of perception, but perhaps the outcome of reputation itself. And so we arrive at the closing moment where everything hangs in the balance, because what began as a glossy campaign of nostalgia and distraction has collided with the cold steel of the courtroom and the rulings that cannot be rewritten with a caption or softened with a photograph. Blake Lively wanted the world to believe in a version of events where speculation was evidence and perception was reality. But the judge has made it clear that the law requires more than suspicion, and the opposing side has made it clear they are building a strategy that grows sharper with every filing, every objection, every carefully prepared motion. And while the public scrolls through smiling photos and tender memories, the truth is moving forward in ways that cannot be slowed or softened. And the silence of her former co-stars, the skepticism of the media, the growing weight of legal opinion, all combine to create a storm that no amount of nostalgia can shield against. Because when speculation collapses, the foundation of her case collapses with it. And that is where the suspense now lies. Not in the photos of the past, but in the decisions of the future. Not in the stories she tells, but in the facts the court demands. And the longer this stretches, the clearer the divide becomes between illusion and reality. And once that divide becomes undeniable, no amount of glamour or memory will cover it. And in that moment, the question will be answered. What matters more? The curated image or the unyielding truth of the record? And when that answer comes, it will not be in an Instagram caption. It will be in the judgment of the court and the verdict of public opinion standing side by side, impossible to ignore.